Hello out there, and today we are taking a look at the SOG Stout FLK, and this is a new design and my first SOG in a very long time. If you call them SOG, if you call them SOG, I don't care. I call them SOG. I don't buy their knives very often. And the reason for that is they just don't usually appeal to me. And then I see this one coming out, designed by Mikkel Willemsen, a stout, as the name suggests, folder in a small kind of package, sort of pillar sized. And I thought, all right, this is the one that's going to get me back into SOG and give them a shot with one of their new things that they are releasing. I know there have been a lot of people lately who have been, getting back on the SOG train and trying out some of their new models and saying that they're great. But those models just really haven't appealed to me. And so it was this one that finally got me hooked and back in. And, after having this in pocket and carrying it and using it every day for the past couple weeks, I got to tell you, I'm probably going to buy another SOG because this one is a pretty darn good knife. And especially if you look at this size range, this smaller folder range, the way that I do, I think you might like this one. It certainly isn't perfect. There certainly are some opportunities and some things I would have liked to have seen be done slightly better. But overall, this is a pretty darn good knife. And again, it was enough to really make me open my eyes again for SOG knives. So let's get into it and explain why I feel that way and get started with a few size comparisons. And the size here, the cutting edge, you can see is just around 2.75, 2.8 inches overall. So that's going to be good for a lot of people who, have some kind of legality issues and restrictions. It's also just a pretty good standard EDC size for a lot of people. For me, when I first got into carrying knives, this is the size knife that I wanted to have. Take a look at it next to a Spyderco Ambitious, and you can see that it has a slightly longer handle and a slightly, well, really not much longer cutting edge, but you have that forward choil that just makes it better in hand. So it feels like a bigger knife maybe than some other things. The CRKTP is a really good comparison in terms of size as well. Pretty similar look overall and general size, but definitely a big difference when it comes to the weight and the materials. And we're going to get back to the Pete in terms of comparison in just a bit, I think, as well. Let's bring in a mini grip. So the mini grip is a slightly larger knife overall, as you can see. Arguably not as good in hand as the Stout, so there's that. And then last but not least, and this is weird because I don't have one assembled, but I do have a Pilar. And so we'll actually sort of just plop the blade right on top where the choils are. You can see the SOG may be a little bit larger there, but the handles similarly shaped and somewhat similarly sized. Not sure if that's really going to work for you in terms of the comparison, but hey, it's what we got. The weight of this knife, and I have heard a couple people say almost a negative thing about this, being 4.11 ounces. I think it's listed at 4.09. You take a look at that Pete, 2.46 ounces, so super light compared to it. It doesn't matter. I'll tell you that right now. The weight on this doesn't matter. If you have this knife, you're going to buy it in order to use it. You're not buying it to win beauty pageants. It is a good-looking knife, don't get me wrong, but I mean, this is a knife that is meant to be used. It feels good. That weight, that substantial feeling in your hand is a positive thing. So yeah, if you don't want a 4-ounce knife, don't buy it. But if you're worried about weight, then I don't know. I mean, this is good for what it is. There are two different versions of this knife at this point, I believe. I think there's one that is like a satin with an olive drab handle, and then we have this blacked out version. The blacked out one looked awesome to me, so I definitely went with that. When we're taking a look at the blade and some of the specs and what we have here, we have a Cryo D2 blade. It's D2, that's what I call it. D2 is a steel that I like a lot, so I certainly don't have a problem with that. When we take a look at the rest of the blade, So it is completely blacked out. Nice spine here, pretty big opening hole. Not really the best to open the knife with, but we'll get back to that. A little bit of a swedge. And yeah, the black coating, I thought at one point, and I have used this knife a pretty decent amount already, I thought at one point that it was already starting to like fade on like the edges here, but no, it isn't. So yeah, the coating is doing just fine so far. And the big talking point, and I think the reason why it's called Stout, is just how thick this knife is at the tip. It just has a little bit of a durable kind of look to it. And you can see, and I have had some conversations with a few blade and edge experts who I look up to in the community. I've called out a couple people just to get their take on this. And the understanding is that, and you can see just like how significant this bevel is here. You know, the take on it is that it's a thicker knife right here behind this edge, so it is just going to have a stronger tip than a lot of knives that don't have that. So, I mean, if you take a look at, you know, the edge of the CRKT Pete, bringing that back in, you can just see how different it is. You know, not that the CRKT has a weak tip, it certainly isn't the strongest tip, but it just isn't designed with that stout, quote unquote, idea behind it. And the thing that I like is, yeah, I think that in terms of use, you know, I was expecting, all right, well, it's going to be thick behind the edge, so we're not going to cut particularly well. But you can see how that that depth of this bevel tapers off. And while it still is a little bit, you know, deep here, it isn't particularly thick behind the edge in this like main cutting area where you're going to be doing most of your slicing and your push cuts and breaking down boxes and stuff. So strength for the piercing and, you know, those kind of like chores where if you have to get into a prying situation, sure. And then actually being able to cut fairly well with this as well. Again, zero issues, came razor sharp as well. But this is one of those things that we will need a long-term follow-up after a few sharpenings to really see how that's going to hold up and how the long-term like durability of it and how the maintenance of this is going to go. You know, this is a flat grind, and like I said, you can feel that thickness here, but it really, really does slim down here at like the belly of the knife. All right, so now that we've talked about all that, we see we do have some blade stamping designed by Mikkel Willemsen. Really like this designer. That was the big draw of the knife to me at first, was getting something from him because I like the stuff that he does in general. And then over here it says Studies and Observations Group, which I had no idea that's what SOG stood for. Stout FLK. FLK means frame lock knife, and that's just an odd thing to put in with the name, right? I mean, it's a frame lock. We can see that it's a frame lock. You know, if they're going to make other versions, they could just call it the Stout 1, Stout 2. I don't know. They don't necessarily have to say that, but that's the explanation for the name. So Stout FLK. And then finally, as we're about to leave the blade, we move on back and we have this jimping here. And the jimping is a high point for this knife because we got some good jimps. And I'm telling you, these jimps are strong and they sure do grip the hand very well. Really good jimping on this knife. Excellent job. It's the perfect amount of jimping in the perfect spot with the perfect amount of like traction. It really grabs the thumb perfectly. And on a small knife where maybe you'd be worried about not really being able to bear down, this is exactly what I personally am looking for jimping in a knife. All right, so now that we've started on that, let's just get into the ergos. This is a pretty comfortable knife. You are going to want to use this forward choil. This is not one of those knives where you're really going to be using it back here. That really doesn't make any sense. So you're using the forward choil, thumb right here, and the comfortability, if that's even a word, is high. The comfort level, let's say, it's very high. The G10 is a medium traction here. It's good. It's a little bit more of a high traction, let's say, than the Spyderco Tenacious, something like that. All right, so I like the G10. It's a pretty darn good scale. No issues with the machining or the finishing on it. It's pretty darn nice. We flip to the frame side. Take a look at that. We have a stainless steel frame. It's pretty nice like design in the cutout here, and I really, really like the matte finish on it. It's a very attractive flat matte finish. So yeah, good frame. It isn't slick particularly, and again, if you're right-handed, you're going to be getting your fingers on the G10. Me, I'm left-handed, no worries at all. The clip isn't a hot spot. No problem with it whatsoever. All right. Now let's continue to move on back. Let's talk about this clip. So this is one of those little, maybe a downer when it comes to SOG. It always has been. They're clips that even if they ride well, they're just sort of silly in the way that they stamp their name on them. I personally don't care for that. I don't understand why it's there, because no one's really getting that close to my pocket to see what I'm to see what I'm carrying. So there's not really a purpose for that in my estimation. But, you know, that said, again, if no one's really looking at it, then what does it matter? It really doesn't. It is a good clip, though. It is nice, deep carry, loop over, and I really like the whole reversible underneath the scale. Very simple. Doesn't disrupt the lines of the knife with this extra screw here. So, yep, very good. Very good. And even though we do have that, like, stamping, it's not that big of a deal. All right, we have a lanyard hole, doesn't disrupt the carry of the knife. So again, that is a good thing as well. Let's take a look. So this is the knife, open position, hitting all those details. All right, so a couple things that I don't care for with this knife. All right, one of them is a minor thing, and it sort of involves the opening and closing. So we'll start with that, and then we'll get into the action. So in the D10, you can see this knife doesn't close securely in the D10. It has a little bit of rattle. You can shake it. It rattles a little bit, but you can't shake it out, so that's not a big deal. It's just, you know, just not perfect fit and finish. And it wasn't like this when I first got it. It sort of developed over the course of like the first few days of carrying it and opening it. Whatever. I have a ZT, the 0393, does the same thing. Still really like that knife. So not a big deal as long as it doesn't affect the functionality, and the action on this knife is really, really top notch. It's good. The flipping action is very nice. Good and snappy. So I definitely appreciate that. We do have this opening hole, this thumb hole that I was talking about, and it I don't know, it isn't the easiest to flick with your thumb. I mean, pop it open and slow roll for sure, as you can see there. So that's good. You know, pinch it out, pull it two-handed if you want to. Spider flick is great. So you have that. But yeah, just like flicking it like that, it works, as you can see, but, you know, it takes some getting used to, a little bit awkward. But for me, I mean, there's a multitude of other ways to open the knife, so not that big of a deal at all. All right, guys, we are going to demonstrate the action on this SOG Stout FLK. It is pretty darn drop shutty. It is dropping right onto my thumb, and so it might cause me to bleed here. If you are squeamish, do not watch. It's not going to be anything crazy, but just wanted to warn you. It's one of those sacrifices you got to make if you got a YouTube channel, because I got to show you what's going on here. But pretty darn good action. Loving it. Good stuff. Sacrifices need to be made. All right, and then the lockup is a big talking point. So we have a knife that's supposed to be a heavy-duty, you know, work knife. Like, how does it lock up? Like a vault. This knife really, really locks up well. The lock engagement is excellent, and it makes me want to come back and compare it again to the Polar. And the Polar that I have, again, is in pieces. And it makes me think about doing long-term reviews more often, because I did a review for the Polar years ago when it first came out, and I think in the title of that video it says, "Stop watching this, go buy the knife." Because I really like the knife that much, and it was great. The first one that I had was fantastic. You know, great design. I love what Vox did with it, yada, yada, yada. Well, I've modded a ton of these knives, and I've seen about a 50% success rate by CRKT to really have good lock engagement on these knives. It's a crapshoot. The Polar is just not a consistently made knife. At least it wasn't when it first came out. In the first year or so that it was out, I had some bad experiences, and I've handled probably 20 to 30 of them. So half of them, just haven't been great. And yes, that can be adjusted by the user. It can be fixed, all that good stuff. I get it. But for a lot of people, that's just not going to be possible. It's not something that you want to do. And for me, with all my Plars, just because I had that kind of understanding of the model, I didn't want to do a lot of like heavy cutting with them because I just didn't feel confident. And this knife it has that lockup. When you feel it, you feel confident that it's going to be just fine all the time. And I don't know, I mean, with this kind of engagement, I would be surprised if there were a lot of lockup issues on these runs at all, just because it seems like just the way that it's designed and executed that would not be a problem whatsoever. So that is definitely a high point. The lowest point of this knife, for me, the biggest bummer is the hardware. So T6 body screws, that's fine. Not a huge deal. I mean, obviously I prefer T8, but T6s are smaller. I get it. But a T6 pivot, come on. So the T6 pivot, and for me, unfortunately, the two pivots, and you can see I think we have a bushed pivot in here. They're operating in tandem with each other. So, I've got to do the whole break up the Loctite kind of thing. And unfortunately, the bit that I was using was just a little bit stripped, and I didn't realize it. So I have to get a new bit in order to disassemble this knife. I would very much like to disassemble this knife because I want to get in there and clean it and see what it's all about on the inside. If you want to see a disassembly video of this, The Last Ranger, I believe, is his channel. I will link to his video on this knife because he has a disassembly video of this blade. So that's pretty cool. But yeah, just a bummer about the hardware. Like, why wouldn't you make a T8 pivot at least for this? So that sort of is what it is. All right, overall, guys, I'm pretty happy with this knife. I think that it's a really, really good entry for someone who wants something in like a smaller size range, but is going to be able to, or wants to be able to actually get a lot of stuff done and wants to use their knife. Like when I compare this to the Pete, I mean, it's like night and day, and there are plenty of days, probably most days, if I'm being honest, that the Pete is a perfectly suitable EDC for the things that I need to do. But I do feel just a little bit more confident and comfortable cutting with this guy. And I think that there's a lot of financial value when it comes to feeling one way versus the other. And I mean, at the end of the year and at the end of the day, I might prefer the Pete as a knife overall. But the SOG Stout definitely has its place in this size range, especially at the price point that it's going to be at, because this was a $55 knife on SOG's website. This is the only place where I've seen it for sale yet. It hasn't really made it to like the main distributors. So $55 price point, it will most likely be a little bit more inexpensive when it does reach like the Blade HQs and the knife centers and those places. So, if you get this around 45, 50 bucks, I think this is a pretty good win for SOG, and it's one that yeah, I'll be interested to revisit once I need to really do some sharpening on it and do more than just touch up the edge after a good amount of use. All right, guys, that's what I got here. Any questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, let me know down below. I really appreciate it. Thanks very much for watching. Take care and have a good one.